Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Durham Cathedral. We're delighted that you can join us for this Durham Cathedral Institute debate. My name is Simon Oliver. I'm a Professor of Theology at Durham University and one of the Residentiary Canons, one of the priests who helps to run the Cathedral and direct the Institute. And this evening we're gathering to consider together the future of secondary education. Before we begin, can I give you one or two bits of practical information? We'll be having a Q&A for about half of this evening's session. We use for that a web-based app called Slido. We're nothing if not tech-savvy in Durham Cathedral. This may be a 1,000-year-old building, but we're very cutting edge. You will have received a slip of paper when you came into the cathedral this evening, and you can scan the QR code on your phone, and that will take you straight to a web page, Slido, where you can enter your question, and that will miraculously appear on my iPad on the stage here. You can also see other questions that have been asked by members of the audience this evening, and you can vote up the questions that you like. Sounds a bit like Britain's Got Talent, doesn't it? But it's even better than that. So do please look out for that, and do send in your questions at any point this evening, and I'll be happy to pose those questions to our speakers when we come to the question and answer session. Over recent months, the state of secondary education has been a focus of significant public concern and debate. Amongst many issues, we've seen falling real terms teacher salaries and strikes, controversy over Ofsted and the culture of school inspections, disparities in pupil attainment between North and South, and perceived underfunding of schools over many years, symbolised in the RAC concrete crisis that has beset many schools across this city and region. Next year we're going to see a UK general election, almost certainly, when the future of education will no doubt be a major concern. To help us consider and think through these issues and to hear our concerns, we're delighted this evening to welcome to the Institute three of the country's leading educationalists. We're going to begin this evening with Dame Rachel de Souza. Dame Rachel was appointed Children's Commissioner for England in 2021. She's one of the country's leading educationalists, a former head teacher, founding chief executive of the Inspiration Trust, a multi-academy trust based in Norwich. And as Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel is tasked with protecting and promoting the rights of our children, particularly the most vulnerable. Would you join me in welcoming Dame Rachel de Souza?
Thank you so much, Simon, thank you so much for having me here, and it's a real honour to address the Durham Cathedral Institute. It's great to be here, and in fact I've just been sitting around the corner with I think about 40 or more young people from a nearby secondary school talking to me about their hopes and dreams for their education and their future. There is no lack of aspiration in the children of the North East, and their passion and desire for their future, their absolute focus on the importance of education, but their broad view of what a great education is was really inspiring. They talked to me about needing a curriculum for adulthood and wanting to learn not just about their favourite subjects, but also about how to keep themselves well, how to understand their taxes, how to understand finances, how to understand what work is, what relationships are, how to keep themselves mentally healthy, how to make the world fairer, how to have opportunities for everybody, what to do about the cost of food. My goodness, they kept us talking, and they had lots to say, and lots to say about how much they love the North East, they love where they live, and how angry they feel about how they feel it's underinvested in, and how their opportunities are not the same as elsewhere. Some real takeaways from them. As Children's Commissioner, my mission is to make this country the best place for children to grow up, and listening to them and knowing what I know, I realise what a huge job we have ahead of us. Before I came into the job in 2021, I was a teacher, a head teacher, and I ran a group of schools, and indeed during lockdown I spent every day in school doing what schools, and many of you are educationalists, doing what schools always do, which is responding to the situation. I had food banks in all my schools, making sure that we checked on children who were at risk of abuse. We actually went and saw them. And that sort of, and delivering beds even, as well as doing online learning, that commitment that schools have, sort of, and what that we saw during lockdown, I think really cemented for me the central place of schools in our communities, and how much actually we have to do to ensure that those children I've just been listening to, that their dreams become real, and how they are really the place where that can happen. And yet, you just heard, we're also in a situation where attendance figures, I mean, I've been sort of passionately trying to advocate for improving attendance since I came into post for the last 2 years. 1.8 million children persistently absent from school, missing 1 day in every 10. 100,000 and more children not back at school at all. We don't know where they are. Severe absence incredibly high, double what it was before the pandemic. 2 years on, it's still as bad. We can see the attainment gap between the better off and the most vulnerable and the worse off growing. When we look at the children who are not in schools, half of children in special schools are persistently absent, they're not in. Half of children in alternative provision are not in. Let alone the sort of general sort of breaking of that normal social contract that you just would go to school. So what is going on? What on earth is going on? I mean, I've thought long and hard about it with that educational background. I mean, I became an academy principal. I was just mentioning to one of my colleagues up here, my first job as a head teacher, I was a Tony Blair Academy principal, started in 2005. And we worked passionately, all of us, and all of you over the last, up until COVID, we were working so hard to narrow the attainment gap, make sure postcode wasn't your destiny, every child could achieve. For me, it was the absolute sort of lifeblood of my career, the golden thread of my career was making sure that every child, whatever background they came from, could achieve as well as any child in any private school. And I did believe that, and I truly believe that. Around 2017, all that work we were doing on narrowing the gap started to slow. So it wasn't just lockdown. And I have a theory about that. My theory about that is that we were focusing so hard on schools as isolated bodies, the curriculum, education, getting that bit right, that would almost hit a glass ceiling. People talk about underinvestment, that's probably true, but where were we underinvesting? Because social care, children's social care, whether that's the special educational needs support, the mental health support, children's social care in general for the most vulnerable children, was not been reformed, progressing, been supported at the same rate as what was happening in the classroom. Then we got COVID, and really what was just holding together flew apart. And I remember coming back just after lockdown. As I said, I'd sat in those classrooms, sat in my schools during lockdown, and looking at the attendance figures and feeling really worried. And actually making that one of my absolute focuses as Children's Commissioner to try and make sure those children got back, but also looking at attainment and looking at general attitudes. And I visit children's hospitals. I go to children's hospitals around the country and they say, our A&E, it's neurodivergent children turning up at A&E who were just holding themselves together, and it absolutely blew apart from during lockdown. All the things that were just about working stopped. So that's why when we look ahead, I've outlined the problem there, but when we look ahead and think about the solutions, when I think of my life as an academy principal, as someone who was devoted to education to get those outcomes, I still have that passion and believe we can do it. But if we're going to make the change we need to make, if we're going to make schools successful for all of our children, give them the agency they need, to have the dreams they need, we're going to have to do different. When I became Children's Commissioner, I did a survey called the Big Ask Survey. I got 500,000 responses. largest survey ever completed by children in the world. And they talked to me from those survey responses and in person, like I had today, about mental health and anxiety worries. 1 in 5 saying that was a concern. They talked to me about their fear that they wouldn't catch up. They talked to me about their parents' well-being and concerns. Every child in that room there, I've just talked to there, talked to me about parents worried about putting food on the table, the cost of, the actual cost of living issues, how it's impacting them, how children can't learn without being fed. And they came up with all sorts of solutions, for me around that. So what do we do? What do we do to make secondary education work? Well, it's my absolute belief that to raise attainment now, we need to tackle the issues around children's social care, around disadvantaged, around mental health. We need to rocket boost support for our most vulnerable children and the services provided to our most vulnerable children. And we need to wrap those services squarely around the child. Children do not see silos. They do not think, that person gives me my education, that person gives me my mental health, that person gives me my dinner. They actually are sitting there and experiencing this all at once, all in the way. So I think we need to support and protect teachers. We need definitely to look at the extended day, bring the youth services and all the different services. The students from Stockton-on-Tees talk to me about guides, cadets, football, the things they want to do after school and how important that is for their mental health. We need to be wrapping that around, but really investing in our mental health services, our special educational needs support, skyrocketing the figures from special educational needs, and not seeing these things as separate from schooling. And on the curriculum, the one thing I would say to you, we're debating post-16. We're debating, should we transform A-levels? We're debating, should there be maths to 18? There was a clear message for me from the young people from Stockton-on-Tees today. They want to learn about adult life. They want to break PSHE curriculum. They want to learn all the subjects they love. They certainly weren't interested in maths to 18, but they did want to know how to work out their credit card bills and what interest meant there, because they didn't know what that meant, in the future, how they were going to manage that. They want to know what a mortgage is. They want skills for life, and they want it taught well. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
The Children's Commissioner walked off with my script. Great. Our next speaker, Sir John Coles, is the Group Chief Executive of United Learning, a group of over 80 academies and independent schools, one of the largest education charities in the UK. Prior to this appointment, John spent 15 years in the Department for Education, the last 4 on its board of directors as Director General of Schools and Director of Education Standards. He was also previously Director of 1419, leading work to increase participation in education and training post-16, and Director of London Challenge, the much copied, much praised strategy to improve schools in London. Would you please welcome Sir John Coles?
Thank you very much, Simon. I feel slightly tired by that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm not going to try and answer all the problems of the education system, but I do think it's worth trying to be as clear as I can about what I think the big problems in the education system that do need to be fixed are. And when I listened to Simon's introduction talking about the problems of getting enough teachers, of teacher strikes, of soft concrete and its effect on schools, of the myriad of problems that have hit the headlines in the last few months, it seems to me that we might just be approaching what I think of as a 1997 moment. And in 1997 there was a general election which was fought in significant part on the subject of education. And education and leaking roofs and problems with buildings became symbolic of the nation's unhappiness with the state of public services and some of what is happening in in our public services, in our schools in particular. And it seems to me that there is a moment here where we need to refocus as a country on the central importance of education, particularly of secondary education, if we are to meet the challenges of the future and deal with the problems that we have inherited from COVID and in other ways. I'll speak from a very different perspective, I think, from Dame Rachel, but I think you'll see that there's a great deal of commonality in the way that we see those problems. It seems to me that we're approaching a world where the future's profoundly unpredictable. It's very hard to see in a myriad of ways how the future is going to develop. We see that through artificial intelligence. People are thinking that the world of work is going to be totally changed in ways that we can't yet predict. We're seeing aspects of technological change which seem constantly to accelerate, and we look at our planet and the climate and we wonder how will we deal with the problems that we face. And as we think about those problems of the future, I think there is a seductive but wrong way of thinking about how we should reform education. The seductive but wrong way is to think that the things that we have done historically should be thrown away, and we should instead try and teach for the present and try and teach people the skills and qualities that we think they might need tomorrow in the world of work. And the reason why I think that's seductive is that the extent of change that we're seeing and the extent to which the world in which today's 5-year-old, let's say, will be going into a future when by the time they retire, we'll be approaching the end of this century. It's very easy to see that a curriculum which seemed right for the 1950s doesn't seem right for the end of the 21st century. However, the problem with that way of thinking, that we should rip up the past and focus on just teaching the skills of the future, is what we really need children to be able to do is to learn and adapt in the future. And the way that you learn and adapt and understand is by understanding a lot now. It's by building up a strong understanding of concepts, of ideas, of things that we do fully understand at the moment. And so, this is what learning is. It is to build up our conceptual framework, to understand new ideas. And we understand new ideas when we understand them in relation to ideas we've already understood. And it is through building up our depth of knowledge and understanding that we come to be able to learn about new domains and new areas of experience and practice. And so I want to say that the thing we should not do over the next few years is enormously rework our model of education. I don't think we should tear up the curriculum. I don't think we should decide that all of the things about academic, general, humane education are not relevant to us, because after all, the traditional subjects of school and university are the best way that we have of gathering together, understanding, teaching and learning about everything that human beings have learned over the course of their history. And we shouldn't throw away some of those traditional things, the scouts, the guides, drama, music, sport, which have become integral to the lives of young people over generations. These are powerful ways in which young people learn social skills, relationships, in which the whole young person is developed. And in my day job, we talk about powerful knowledge and we talk about education with character. And I think those are the two strands that need to remain in secondary education. And the last thing we need is a centralised drive for more curriculum change. So if I don't think that's the right focus, what do I think the right focus is? Well, I think there are 4 things. Let me say, first of all, before I mention the 4 things, there is a 5th thing, of course, which is the buildings. There is nothing to say about school buildings other than the only solution to the problems we have with school buildings is investment. There are no clever shortcuts, there are no clever reforms which can solve the problems of falling down buildings, and only capital investment in buildings can solve the problems of buildings. Let me say, there are 4 other things that I think are really fundamental issues facing us now, and they do touch on some of the same ground as Rachel has just talked about. So the first is attendance, the second is the labour market, in other words, the labour market for teachers and for staff working in schools. The third is the wider children's services, again, that Rachel has talked about. And the fourth that I want to talk about is the north-south divide in education, which it seems to me, speaking in Durham, is particularly important for us to face up to. And then there are two enablers, which I will come to at the end. So firstly, attendance. Just recently, the House of Commons Education Select Committee published a report on attendance, and as Rachel said, it shows a pretty grim picture of children not having returned from COVID, of attendance nationally across all social classes, across all regions being down. It emphasises some of the reasons for that, which are quite deep. They are young people feeling that their needs are not being met is one really important component of this. And whether that's mental health needs or special educational needs and disability, or whether it's wider needs, social needs, anxiety, these are kind of profound issues. And secondly, the backwash from COVID and the effect that that has had on parents' belief that turning up every day to school is fundamentally important has been significant. I think there's been a real shift, and it's visible in many of the communities that our schools serve. There's been a real shift in the level of belief and trust that parents and communities have, that turning up to school every day really is important. While they didn't go to school during COVID and nothing terrible happened, you've had all of these strikes, and they can't go to school on those days. Why are you telling us that every day matters? Ironically, just at the moment when we have the most compelling evidence that we've ever had, that literally every day matters. If you turn up to school 99% of the time compared to somebody who turns up 100% of the time, it makes 1/10 of a grade difference across all your GCSEs. One day we're talking about makes 1/10 of a grade difference across a year 11, on average, across the whole cohort. So every day genuinely does matter, and yet we aren't winning that argument with parents. We're not convincing parents. And the solution to these really deep-seated problems that the House of Commons Education Select Committee led with in their report was to nationalise the system of fining parents. And the idea that that is an appropriate solution to the problems that they identified just shows you something profoundly wrong with the way in which people think about education policy in this country. The idea that people who've lost belief in the education system can be beaten into it by fining them. The idea that young people whose needs are not being met can be made to go to school and somehow their needs magically be met through a system of fining is ridiculous. The idea that nationalising the system of fines, which already exists and is run locally, is a ridiculous concept. So it seems to me that there's something much more profound about the cultures of school, about communication with parents, about the way we engage parents and families with education, which needs attention to be paid to it. Secondly, the labour market. There have been times when it's been as difficult as it is now to recruit teachers. Not many, but there have been times. Around the end of the last century, the turn of the century was one of those times. There has never, in my experience, been a time when it's been as difficult also to recruit support staff to schools. So we have this real challenge of recruiting people and retaining people in schools. Now, I think pay is unquestionably a factor there. I think there's no getting away from that. I think it's also true that we've gone from being the most flexible of the professions to the least flexible of the professions over the course of COVID. You know, once upon a time, the school day and the school holidays was a very family-friendly offer to adults wanting to work in schools. Now, that looks like a very inflexible requirement to be in work every day as compared to being a lawyer or an accountant who might be quite happy to work from home 3 days a week and be in the office a couple of days. We've got a real challenge, in other words, that one of the big things which was a useful selling point for schools now looks like the opposite at the moment. But alongside this, I think there's a real cultural challenge for adults working in schools as well. How do we make schools places where adults want to be? One of my favourite pieces of writing about education is from a book called The Passionate Teacher by somebody called Robert Fried. And in that book, he writes, of some teachers, we remember their foibles and their mannerisms. of others their kindness and their encouragement, and of those who inspired us most, we remember what they cared about, and that they cared about us and the people we might become. That they cared about us and the people we might become. They had time for us as human beings. They invested their time and thoughts and cared for us. And they knew that we had potential, and they were looking at ways to challenge us and take us as far as we could go. And we have to have schools which have that quality of relationship, which have the space and the lack of stress, and the culture which encourages teachers to have that relationship with students, because that's what the adults working in schools want, to have that sort of relationship with young people and to have that impact on them. Two more key issues, and Rachel has touched on the wider children's service. The impact that that is having on schools is profound. If services for the vulnerable and the disadvantaged, and for those with special educational needs and disability are inadequate, then schools are left to be the one service for children and families, sometimes seriously under-resourced and stretched beyond their capabilities to manage. So that need to strengthen and re-support those services is absolutely fundamental. And finally, the North-South divide in education, which is, you may not know and you may not spot this. I consider myself a northerner. I may not sound like a northerner. I didn't grow up in the north, but all my values and my genes are northern, if I can put it like that, and inherited from my mother, who really taught me that education is the most important thing in the world. And I have no time for the excuses that people make about why children in the north are currently doing less well than children in the south. Children in the north are not less capable than children in the south. They do not have less potential. They are not less capable. We have to fix this problem, that there is a growing gap between north and south in the results of schools in this country. And it's a big system issue. It's no use saying it's one fault, it's one issue or another that's causing that problem. I can tell you it's a fixable issue. Simon mentioned that I ran something called the London Challenge back in the distant past. And when I started doing that job, Inner London performed less well than every single other region of the country. And today, the only region that outperforms Inner London is Outer London. It can change, things can change, if there is the effort from government and others and everyone in the system joining together to tackle inequalities and unfairness and things that are wrong. Things can change, and this is one that can change, and I hope that the next government puts that, along with my other three key issues, somewhere near the top of its list. There are two enablers, very quickly. The first is decentralisation, which may seem like a bizarre and abstract concept, but we have the most centralised education system in the world. You cannot solve the problems of every locality from Whitehall. That is not a sensible way of running an education system. It is important, and it's good, that the government thinks that lots of problems are partly, at least, its responsibility, and that it does have a responsibility to be part of the solution. But the way in which government solves the problems needs to be through creating the conditions and the opportunities for local people to solve local problems and to give people space to lead. So that's enabler number one. Enabler number one only works with enabler number two, which is leadership. And I've talked a lot about the culture of schools from the point of view of pupils and teachers. You only get a great school culture if you have a great school leader. And so investing in the leadership of schools, as well as in decentralisation, are two fundamental priorities for the next government. I'm probably over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Do keep your wonderful questions coming in. Our third speaker, the Right Reverend Paul Butler, has been Bishop of Durham since 2014. Bishop Paul sits in the House of Lords, is particularly concerned with issues relating to families, poverty and immigration. He is currently the lead bishop for education and is chair of the Church of England's Education Office, also known as the National Society. Around 1 million children attend Church of England schools, which makes the Church of England the biggest provider of academies in the country. Would you please welcome the Bishop of Durham?
Thank you, Simon. I think I should begin by reassuring everybody here that we had no idea what each other was going to say, because there are some common threads that don't come through, which I don't think we're surprised about, but we did not collude. The reason why we're here today is because education matters. Education is more than textbooks. It's more than memorizing facts and equations. It's even more than the letter or certificate you receive on a piece of paper at the end of it. Education opens doors and opportunities. It shapes us. It develops us as humans, molding the way we think, the way we act, and the decisions we make. So when shaping how we do education in this country, we must ask, what is its purpose? Is the purpose of education preparation for the next exam, or for work, or is it preparation for life as a whole? Now, we are, as human beings, created to be workers. So preparing for work is a good thing. However, before that, we are created for worship and for relationship. A relationship with God, which involves worship, but also relationship with one another, with the other creatures on this planet, and with the earth itself. So should not education preparing us for all these relationships come before preparing for work? Surely, what we want emerging from schools is young people being the very best human beings they can be, wanting to give their lives in serving the good of others, the planet, and the glory of God. I guarantee such people will all be brilliant workers, hence why education for life and wisdom is crucial. As the Church of England has set out in our vision for education, we need to strive for an education where each and every child and young person can be prepared for life in all its fullness. One which sparks curiosity and a desire to learn, where each student finds wisdom, hope, community, and dignity. This is my hope for the future of education in this country. But to turn these hopes into reality, there are challenges. We've had many named. And these have been exacerbated by the pandemic and must be overcome. Rachel's point that some of this was there before the pandemic, that got exacerbated by it rather than entirely caused by it. School absences rose during the pandemic and so far not declined nearly enough, as we've already heard. In the 2022-23 academic year, it's estimated that 22.5% of pupils were persistently absent. That is over 1 in 5 pupils spending more than 10% of school time outside the school. A concerted effort and cooperation from schools, parents, local authorities and the government is required to address this. We must also confront the issue of lower grades. Although education is about more than simply grades, they are an indication of the quality of education that students receive and the levels that they are engaging in their learning. In 2022, 167,000 students in England received a grade 3 or below in their maths GCSE. In English language, this number was 172,000, the highest in a decade. When the numbers of students failing are this high, these students are not only failing their GCSEs, but they are clearly in a system that is failing them. Furthermore, the regional disparity in education attainment is widening. Those in regions with higher levels of poverty and deprivation face higher barriers. In this year's GCSE results, 28.4% of GCSE GCSE grades in London were marked at 7 or above, whilst in the northeast it was only 17.6%. These figures not only reflect the impact of financial poverty on learning, but also perhaps something more sinister, a poverty of aspiration. Because if it's purely on poverty of income, why do Tower Hamlets in inner London do better? Because their levels of poverty are not dissimilar to the northeast. During the pandemic, the Prince's Trust conducted research around the aspirations of young people across the country. And I find the results saddening, with more than a third of young people responding that they felt they will never succeed in life, and that this proportion was even greater among those from poorer backgrounds. The results display a feeling of hopelessness, a lack of belief in their own potential and what they can achieve. We cannot raise GCSE grades and educational attainment without first raising students' ambitions and hopes for the future. With better aspirations, better grades will follow. However, without raising aspirations, talent will remain undiscovered, skills unlearnt, opportunities unrealised, and potential unfulfilled. Greater aspiration will do more than motivate students to achieve better grades. It drives them to continue learning beyond the classroom, motivating them to continue to pursue their interests and ambitions beyond formal education. To tackle the issue of sinking aspirations and the high number of students failing GCSEs, I believe we need to change the system that is failing them. We need to rethink how we do some education and return to its purpose. Now, I find it encouraging to see that both the main political parties are proposing changes to reform education and recognising that a greater understanding of maths and English is needed. I agree and support both their proposals that the study of these key core subjects should continue to the age of 18, as well as the importance of teaching the foundations of these subjects well during the earlier years. But I also believe that these reforms alone are not enough to create the change that is needed, and how you do it is fundamentally important. High numbers of school absences and lower grades suggest a lack of engagement in education. So how can we deliver education in a way that engages all students across all regions and backgrounds? Education needs to connect with all students, sparking interest and a desire to learn. Simply studying subjects for longer will not increase aspirations nor instill a sense of curiosity. I'm convinced that we need a fundamental reshaping which recognises the value of music, sport, dance, drama and art in its many forms. It also needs to recognise that learning the skills involved in making things is not a lower educational achievement than being able to write flowing English or being able to understand mathematical theories. For very many children and young people, their primary gifts and skills lie with their hands, their feet and their bodies. Literacy and numeracy can look like gobbledygook and meaningless blobs to some until they can see how it connects to their absolute love of and skill in working in wood or cloth or metal, or with presenting their feelings and story through dance and drama or a musical piece. There needs to be much greater focus on each child and young person to discern what really makes them tick, what skills they have to offer, and then shape the education around this, rather than sticking with a set of preconceived ways of delivering each and every subject. This also plays to the gifts and skills of teachers. The very best teachers are those who love their subject and care for their pupils. The love of the person makes the children and young people feel they matter. The love of the subject fires enthusiasm in others. When you both love your subject and care for your pupils, you will always seek to find creative ways of helping every pupil engage with the subject as best as they can. And it was a fantastic poem, John. As I said, the purpose of education is about more than work and passing the next exam paper. It is for helping all have life in all its fullness. We need to take an approach where students engage with their learning through providing an understanding of why the skills they learn are important, why they matter, and how they are preparing them for life, all of life, outside of the classroom. When our education system connects with students and provides them with wisdom, hope, community, and dignity, then aspirations rise, love of learning grows, and thus attainments across all areas increase. This will be education which prepares pupils in all their diversity for the paths of life that lie ahead, allowing them to flourish on whichever path they may choose. Let us recover a vision for education that is not what I fear sometimes it has become, a reduced utilitarianism, but rather let us have education for human life in all its fullness. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Paul, very much. We have some wonderful questions, and we have around 45 minutes now for a conversation between the audience and our three expert speakers. So please do continue sending in your questions, or indeed look at those that have been posed, and you can vote up the ones you think are particularly important or interesting. So I'm going to start with currently our most popular question this evening. And I'm going to start with John, I think, on this one. There is a recruitment crisis in education. So why do you think people don't want to be teachers? And how can this be remedied?
Well, this is very booming. Is that okay? So, I mean, a huge issue. I mean, I do think the things that I mentioned are significant. So I think there's no getting away from the fact that pay for teachers versus other professionals is not where it has been in the 15 years ago, let's say. So I think that is a factor. I think secondly, I do think this fact of flexibility being fundamentally important in the post-COVID world is a problem for education. I think we've seen through COVID the limitations of trying to teach remotely, and nobody's keen to make that a part of ordinary life, and therefore teaching is fundamentally a face-to-face activity. And in a world where so many other jobs are now offering opportunities to work from home for part of the week, professional jobs, that is a problem for teaching. Not helped by the fact that teaching was already behind an awful lot of other professions for flexible working opportunities pre-COVID as well. We are, as a system, not nearly as good as we could be in relation to flexible working, so I think that is a factor. I think there's no doubt that either workload, the perception of workload, the perceptions of pressure and accountability are also factors. And again, I think there's no getting away from the fact that trying to make the job doable, manageable, and be seen to be manageable by the wider public are fundamental things. And then thirdly, whenever the graduate labour market heats up, it's much harder to recruit teachers. That isn't just true now, it's been true every time we've had an economic cycle in which graduates have been in high demand. So I think that's the combination of factors. And in a sense, it makes it impossible to avoid the conclusions that further action on pay, school cultures, workload, etc., are fundamental to this. And I think action on flexible working for teachers, again, is a factor in this. So, none of that is straightforward or easy because it all has a big cost to it, and the price tag of that is going to be difficult for any government to meet. But I just think that it's impossible to get away from those big things.
Am I working? Yeah, okay. I agree with everything John said, but I did just want to sort of point to just how amazing teaching is as a job. And I mean, when I left university, everyone said, you've got a fantastic degree, why don't you go try accountancy? In the 80s, everybody was doing either accountancy or law. So I went to KPMG and spent 2 weeks as an accountant, and every night I'd come home and cry and say, I just want to be a teacher. The second I stepped into the classroom, it was just like heaven. And I never look back. And 32 years later, the only thing I miss about being children's commissioner is being in the classroom. So I think, and everybody, so many people I meet, there's a teacher inside of them. They might be doing other jobs, they might be whatever, but they're thinking, maybe I could have been, maybe I could be. And that's why I love some of the schemes like Now Teach, that's actually attracting people from other professions who've had successful careers into teaching, and I've seen that work incredibly successfully. And there is a clue in there, as well as all these reforms that need to happen. I think we have to think about enabling people to teach, because fundamentally, if you're meant to do it, if it's right for you, it is absolutely joyous. And I actually would feel really sad that conditions are taking people away from this amazing vocation. So I think let's enable, frankly, let's do whatever it needs to be done, and let's find teachers and potential teachers wherever they are and make it possible.
Sorry, I've got one more. I think that's all right. Rachel and I were in a primary school in Chester Street this afternoon, and one of the things, every time I go to school, what I love is I see passionate people teaching. They're there because they love it, because they love the working with children, and in secondary schools, often they also love their subject. So I think the nature of careers is changing radically. So seeing it as a second career is absolutely one of the things that I think we need to help people look at much more. But also, I'd want to raise the issue of careers education generally, and the lack of that in many, and that actually just presenting teaching as a great career to 14, 15, 16-year-olds, so they get it in their heads, this might be well worth it.
Thank you, Bishop. John mentioned school attendance and this being quite poor post-COVID, and parents not being convinced that children attending schools every single day is vital, that every day counts. And John mentioned the centralisation of the system for fining parents for children not attending school, which does sound like a crazy idea. So the question then is, and maybe we could start with Rachel here, how can parents be more educated in encouraging children to engage with school?
Great question, because attendance is everybody's business, not these parents. I was super keen and have tried to push Secretaries of State for the last 2 years, and there have been quite a few of them. In fact, last summer, on Monday, I think I had Nadeem as my Secretary of State and chatted to him. On Wednesday, Michelle Donlan, and on Friday, James Cleverly. And then there was another one, and then there was another one, and that's part of the problem, actually, with education at the moment. One of the children said to me, Could we just have stability here? But back to parents, I mean, I have tried to urge our Secretaries of State to run a real campaign that unashamedly talked about why going to school is really important. Because we know going to school is a proxy, attendance at school is a proxy for children doing what they want to do. They tell me they want to learn, they want great careers, they want agency. It's also a proxy for safety. I will never forget having to go out and speak about Arthur Lavinia Hughes' death. I'll never forget his last words, "Nobody loves me." We'll never forget that. Had he been at school, had he been attending, and he was able to during COVID because he was vulnerable, he would have been safe. So it's a proxy for safety, it's also a proxy for fun. We need to be sharing with parents far more about why school attendance is important for children's positive mental health. The answer to children's anxiety and mental health is to be at school with friends, playing, doing the things that children do. Straight after COVID, when I was worried about children's mental health, I still am, I phoned Sarah Jane Blakemore, who's a neuroscientist in Oxford, and said, how can we improve children's mental health? She said, a few good relationships and spending time with those peer relationships every day. School. So we need to convince parents, yes, about why school is important for grades, really important, but also why it's important for the child's well-being. And all the other things that school brings. And I think there is an absolute role for a national campaign. I think many schools are doing a great job opening their doors and bringing their parents in. And I think we should be doing that more and making schools a real locus of support for families as well. So school is just a natural place to go and to turn to. When I did my recent family review, I talked to and did a nationally representative survey of adults in this country and asked them what were the two places that they trusted. And the two places they said were school and GPs. So I do fundamentally think the trust in school is there. We just have to make sure and support parents to get children back over the threshold of school. And one of the best ways of doing that is by getting them over the thresholds of school. So having all the activities and support for parents, for families at school as well, I think is a great way of doing it. But nothing wrong with an absolutely out there national campaign saying why school is great, parents, for parents, and actually targeted about parents, because clearly something is not working. When I phone all my head teacher friends, and colleagues, they'll say it is way worse than before the pandemic, and that is right across, right through our well-off families to our poorest. Friday, want to stay off, just doesn't matter. That was really pretty unheard of before lockdown. So we have to come back and explain with John's stats, but also all the things around children's well-being and why school is so important to that. So we need to get out there and do that.
I don't think I've got a great deal to add to that. One of the things that I'm not sure whether the research has been done, how the levels of child and young people's anxiety, how much actually is that projected anxiety from the parents? I think there's a real issue now around parents are not, because they're worried, and the children become more worried because they're feeding off the parents' anxiety. I might be wrong, but you're both nodding, so.
I mean, just very quickly, firstly to say I think this is absolutely the right question. I think one of the things that I found, and I agree with Rachel's points here, this is across all social classes, all regions of the country, there is a change in attitude. And I think it is easy to see why, but I think it is much harder to see how to counter it. And all the progress that has been made on attendance, which had been a focus of national policy and local action for 20 or more years, it was always slow grinding progress over 20 years. So we never had a magic bullet which kind of solved everything. One of the things that I thought though was really depressing about some of the work that the Education Select Committee had done is that they were identifying that parents were seeing the fining system, which they then went on to recommend. The parents were seeing the fining system as just another cost of doing business, as it were. So if you could save £300 on a holiday by doing it in term time rather than holidays, and then you got fined £60, well, you were still 240 quid up, weren't you? And obviously that's got a logic to it. But I don't think that if you said to parents, well, you'll save £300, but you will harm your children quite a lot, that's not an equation that parents would, on the whole, think was in their favour. And so I do think this question of how do we show, convince, persuade, on the basis of the evidence, which is absolutely compelling, that in fact every day does matter. If parents were convinced of that, then the issue of finding overwhelmingly would go away. I do think it is a national campaign. I think that's part of it. But I think it has to be a national campaign with some really serious bit of local delivery to it, because as Rachel says, it's teachers, it's your teacher and your head teacher on the whole that you trust as a parent or as a family. And so hearing it from your head and from teachers, and then there's quite a bit of evidence about what are the moments where you can have impact. So on the whole, parents are sort of interested in listening to teachers some of the time, but there are moments when they're really interested in listening to teachers. For example, when your child first goes to school, when your child first goes to secondary school, when your child starts an exam course. These are moments when, as a parent, you pay much more attention because there's a change and it's an important change, and you recognise it. So it's using those moments and using teachers and heads in leading a national campaign that I think is going to be important.
Thank you, John. Teachers are doing their best, but equally they are exhausted with no time or space for their learning, continual professional development. What can we do to support their professionalism? John, would you like to start with that?
Well, I'll tell you what we do to support teachers' professionalism. I mean, look, there are no easy solutions to this. I mean, as a teacher, you do work very hard. And most teachers are very committed to working very hard, because as long as the work they're doing is really focused on the progress and success and meaningful activities in the interests of children, teachers work flat out. And I think because it is a vocation for so many, that's at the heart of what they do. So I think there are some important things that you can do, though. I mean, the first is, I think there are some practices and in-school behaviours and things that you can do which just take away stress and unnecessary pressure, workload, time from teachers. Some of those are about behaviour and the behaviour systems in a school. Having a behaviour system which means that the teachers don't have to do that much in order to have disruption-free learning in their classes. And I won't get boring about the details of that, but there are some very effective things you can do. And things like, this is going to be really popular with young people in the audience, having a centralised system of detentions is a really great thing to do, because it means that teachers hardly ever have to take a detention, and yet you can have extremely high expectations in everything that you do. So there are lots and lots, I won't give you loads of examples, but there are lots of little things that well-led schools do in order to mean that the ordinary day-to-day stress and life of a teacher is made as good as it can be. Secondly, we have every term an additional day off for teachers. It's not a day off for teachers, it's a planning day. It's a day off for students. We have some freedom as a result of being academies to give additional days for teachers to plan, prepare, and do CPD. So we have one of those at the start of every term, which is a planning day for every member of staff in the school to prepare for the term ahead. That is designed precisely to try and deal with some of the, I know it's not everything, but it's a small thing that makes a difference. And then in terms of professionalism, it's the quality of CPD, it's the routines of CPD in your school. We offer a lot of CPD to professional development, professional development programs and courses to teachers, which are available for people at every stage of their career. So there is a lot that can be done. And then alongside that, there are a whole load of things about the culture of the school, the way in which you give teachers flexibility, the way in which you take account of the wider lives of teachers. All of our best heads, I would say, when a teacher says, there's this particular really important event in my life which is coming up, can I have a day off? it's pretty automatic that our teachers will say yes to that when it's a child's graduation or it's a similar. So simple things which are designed to show that you value staff and you want to invest in them and you make those investment opportunities available and you run your school, of course, first and foremost in the interests of children, but with a real focus on doing it in the interests of adults and making it a great place to work as well as a great place to learn. That's probably enough for me.
Rachel?
So I guess I would say, having been a teacher for many, taught for 30 years, although less towards, once you're ahead, teaching is always exhausting, and particularly so coming post-pandemic with all the extra things that are laid on. I do absolutely accept it's exhausting. I remember going home from teaching for all those years, every day, exhausted. Also joyous, as I said, so I want to make the claim that whilst it's extremely tiring, it's extremely amazing and wonderful too. So what can we do? I think there's something really important about asking teachers, and that's head teachers, management asking teachers what it is they want and need. I think listening, I think one of the big messages the young people here from Stockton gave me today was, why don't they listen to us as children? Adults are no different. If you work somewhere, actually listening to what the things that might be getting in the way, causing a problem, or could alleviate issues, is always key. And I think that is absolutely local, and that's about the kind of ethos you're creating. I think when surveys of teachers have been done, I think teachers want very different things at different times in their lifetime. Early career teachers are often really keen to get mentoring opportunities, to get time to go see other things, to those kinds of things. And actually planning those in can be invigorating and really, as they're planning their next move or developing. Whereas teachers of 20 years or more might have very different wants and desires, both incredibly important in your school life. Both of those types of teaching, you want that balance of the young ones, the more experienced ones, and we need to be making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of them. I'd also say, I think, especially given the points I've been making, we need to let teachers teach. And we need to make sure that teachers can focus on both those rich subject experience, giving children those rich subject experiences, those deep subject experiences, and also giving children the experiences of life that we've talked about. And who remembers that school trip they went on year 7? I remember mine. Those things that teachers do there, letting them focus on those things, or the clubs, whatever it is they're leading, and making sure, I think teachers talk to me most about, where are the youth services? Where's the mental health support for this child? I am having to make sure, I'm washing this child's clothes. We need to make sure we've got the support around teachers to do those things and look after the wider needs of children. And I would argue very much that support needs to be around the school, because that's the place that children and families can actually receive that support, so that teachers can, be enabled to do the things that they should be doing and want to be doing, not be pulled in so many directions. What they should be able to do is signpost and those things be picked up. So hence my plea earlier for ensuring children's services and support for children is really, really well funded, well supported, and wraps around the child, which to my mind means wrapping around the school. It's not about, I'm a teacher here, so all I'm interested in is teaching this subject or giving these experiences. We know that children don't experience like that, but teachers can't do all of those things, and we need to make sure that those wider services are there.
So one of the things that I think I'm proudest of in my time chairing the National Society is the Church of England's education nationally has shifted into professional development, often and leadership training in a much, much bigger way than it ever has done before. We've done it jointly with the Roman Catholics. And all the kind of features that you said, but the thing we've tried to do is we've said other companies do this, other trainers do this. What's the added value that a church-based thing does? And it's It's the mentoring, it's the group work, but it's always working with the individual. Say, do you want an individual mentor? Would you like a group mentoring, and so on? One of the most significant things that in the last year or so, is particularly developing leaders from minority heritage, global heritage minority teachers into leadership, because that's a desperate shortage in the country, and the early results are very, very encouraging, I would say, if you put that investment in. And I think we do need to learn from the academies about the extra day, because if you have a day where you can do that planning, that makes a very big difference.
There are questions about faith schools coming up, Bishop. But for the moment, one question that has been persistently high this evening concerns how we judge, how we do examine schools. Are we using the right metrics to judge schools? Should pupil well-being and opportunities offered be more important than exam results? Rachel, would you like to start with that?
So I think you're probably going to know that one of the, given when I described my own experience and what I believed about all children being able to achieve, that I see those exam outcomes as enablers for children, as well as something that are good in themselves. So I think I will always argue for the highest school standards. I would always want to know that children were attending and that children's outcomes were as good as they could be. But of course, we need to make sure that children's well-being is paramount. And there are so many ways that schools do that. And I think we need to be better at, so whether it's Ofsted, whether it's the regulator, whether it's DFE, need to be better at recognising the different ways of capturing that, because children's happiness at school is really important. And when I talk to children about what they value most about school, all of them say their education's important. They all recognise the link with their future lives, and that's important. But they also talk about that favourite teacher, the friends that they play with, the activity they really like, some of them even their school dinners. And school is so much more than just that very important exam grade. It's about your development. Now, the current Ofsted grading does look at personal development, but I think we could do a lot more to capture that and prioritise it, and to recognise the fantastic job that so many teachers and schools do. I was talking about it in the pandemic, the way that schools just went into action. Yes, it was online learning, but it was also, supporting the well-being and safety of all their children. And I think we do need to look at how to capture that better.
Bishop Paul.
The Church of England has to do a certain amount of inspecting itself under what's called science. So that's particularly looking at RE and collective worship. But where it's a voluntary aided school or academies that are based out of the voluntary aided schools, they also have to look at the ethos and the vision and the values. And we've just completely rewritten how it's done. I will say this here. We've avoided saying anything about comparing to Ofsted, but the reality is that we've rewritten the science framework in a way which is radically different from the way Ofsted is currently doing stuff. So one of the things we said, no one-word judgments. That just doesn't work. It doesn't. And it's much more around what is the vision and the ethos of the school, and is the school living up to that? And then when you do that, actually, surprise, surprise, you discover that you do look at grading, you do look at attainment, you look at safeguarding and everything like that. So I do think a more rounded view of how well is a school serving the whole child. Where I want to be slightly cautious is this has been referred to before. There's a danger, I think, now that some schools are being pushed down, judged down, because they're not delivering things that they're not supposed to deliver. And that's the rounded support. And they're being criticised for not delivering things that, frankly, it's a wider system than the social care system should be. So, but a more rounded judgment, I think, is healthier. And one-word judgments, not good.
John?
Well, this is always a vexed question, isn't it? I suppose I come at this, as probably most of us do at some level personally. I come from a family where nobody had been to university before, where all my grandparents had left school by the age of 14. And when I think, what's the difference between me and them? Well, it's not genetic, is it? Because I got all my genes from them. So it must be something environmental. And there are two major environmental factors which account for the fact that I'm now sitting in Durham Cathedral talking to you all, which would have been totally unimaginable for my grandparents. One is that my mother thought that education was the most important thing. And two was I went to a school where I could get great exam results. And I don't think you can take away from the central importance, if you want children to have opportunity, and children who don't have great opportunities to have opportunity, doing well in your exams is the thing that takes you somewhere different and gives you opportunity. And I don't think it's a failing of the system to regard examination results as important. I think they are really important because they change lives. Are they the only important thing? No, of course they're not. And the point about teachers who care about us and the people that we might become is that as teachers and as parents, I don't think we should accept the idea that caring about us and caring about the people we might become are in conflict with one another. I don't think they are at all. As a parent, I don't think, well, shall I care about my child and love them every day, or shall I challenge them to be the best they can be? That's not an either or. That's a both and, isn't it? Of course it is. And so that's what we want from everyone who's engaging with children and young people. Should we then put how well do you love the children in your school into Ofsted frameworks, into measurements and league tables? Well, it seems to me that that would take us in a really dangerous direction. Do we really want to have that as and all the perverse consequences that might come from doing those things in our accountability system? I don't think I'm in favour of that. I do think I'm in favour of us trying to approach all of the processes we have with humanity and with our eyes open and not getting caught up in the technicalities of things and thinking hard about what really matters and not trying to trip schools up and catch them out on technicalities. Possibly not the answer most of the audience wants.
Thank you, John. Bishop Hall, Vishal Mangalwadi, the Indian Christian social reformer and philosopher, recently stated the church should reclaim education. Another question, should the church keep out of education in a secular society?
So, are we really a secular? I'm very tempted to say I'm not sure we are a secular society. But I understand where the question is coming from. Well, given the demand that there is, the growing demand for people to send their children to church schools of all kinds, clearly, however secular the society is, there's an awful lot of parents who want us to be involved in education. And we can never not be involved in education because the very nature of the Christian faith encourages us to want people to be the very best, and that means education. So we're not going to step away from it. And it's really interesting, if you look at the spread of Christianity around the world through its history, three things have always led the way. establishing places of worship, establishing places of education, and establishing places of healthcare. Every time the Christian faith has arrived in new communities, those three things have happened and continue to happen. So, yeah, I think we should actually be constantly raising our game. We should be the very best schools that we can possibly be, and deliberately offering education which says spirituality matters, and that it will be at the heart of what we do. That's not saying the schools should be evangelistic. It's about recognizing that we're spiritual people. There we go.
Thank you. Rachel.
So just a couple of comments to add to that. I mean, I was educated through my entire, from 2.5 right through to 21 in the Catholic system, in church schools, in Catholic church schools, and actually owe a huge debt coming from an immigrant family, with no education no university background in this country. It was the education of those great nuns, actually, who had to put up with me, and what is it that I thought was so great about it? Because I think it's high standards, but more than that, I think they were able to sort of love my soul and help me see that there was more to myself without being totally obsessed with any individual or making it so that we were obsessed with ourselves. There was a certain sort of in a really excellent church education, there's an ability to sort of make you focus on what you're doing, your duty, service, love, without being so focused in on yourself. That so many children, and why I'm focusing on that is because so many children talk to me today about how much they suffer because they're always on social media and totally obsessed with how they're coming across to the world and how they see themselves. So it's that thing of there being something more, something about yourself that's sacred and is a beautiful thing without you having to be that perfect thing. So that's just a personal thing. But of course, there would be no education in this country had the Church of England not basically, when elementary education came in, had let its churches, or let all its schools, which it had set up, go to the state. The church has always been involved in education, and I think parents really value being able to make that choice. And as Bishop Paul says, they do tend to vote with their feet towards the church schools. So I'm very pro-choice on these matters, and I think there will always be a place in British education for our church schools.
Anything to add, John?
Well, I suppose only just to say on this question, do we live in a secular society? I think there's a pretty compelling argument that questions of faith and understanding faith have never been more important in our country. And I think I would argue in the world as well. And so, whilst I also understand why somebody might say we live in a secular society, I think I would question that quite deeply. And I think whether you attend a church school or not a church school, the place of religious education in our schools has never been more important. And I think it's a good thing that people of faith are engaged in education. And I think it's a good thing that people of faith are able to be open about their faith and have that respected in our schools. So all of that says to me that the role of the Church of England in education is hugely important. And I've always loved, I don't sit on the fence with this, I've always loved the Church of England's approach to education, because the Church of England really says, unlike any other faith group actually in the country, our schools are for everyone. They are community schools. We are not evangelising, but we are living out our faith and the love of Jesus Christ through our mission in educating everybody, whoever they might be. And that is and that's a profound and important mission. And there is also the brute fact that if we didn't have church schools, we wouldn't have enough school places in this country. So whether you like it or not, they're here to stay.
Can I add something? Of course. We have a horrible situation going on in Israel, Palestine, Gaza at the moment. And the Archbishop of Canterbury has just been out to spend 3 days out there. I know that conversations have gone on between the Archbishop of Canterbury and key politicians around that. And one of the key bits has been, please, senior politicians, please understand you will never get to the root of this situation if you think it's entirely political. You have to understand the roots in Islam, Judaism, Christianity, in people's faith, and how passionate that is. So even if we were an entirely secular society, we don't live in an entirely secular world, and if we want people to serve in the world as a whole, they've got to understand the religious roots and so on. So that's another factor.
Thank you very much. A question that's been persistently high in our rankings this evening concerns political parties. We are almost certainly going to have a general election next year, and we're going to transition perhaps from one government to another. What exactly are the Conservatives doing to help education in the UK? Has the system been failing since they were voted into power? Maybe I could put that to you by saying, if there is a change of party in power next year, do you see a significant change in education policy? John, would you like to start with that? Tricky question.
Not really.
I guess we don't know.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the opposition has been very cautious in what it's saying publicly. And I think that's good political strategy, in truth. I'm not sure whether they'll go into a lot of detail before the election. So, in truth, I don't know whether there'll be, I hope that's helpful. Here I am speaking in front of an audience, I don't know. Have the Conservatives done some good things for our education system? I think undeniably they have. And I think there are lots of positives in the record in education. And in truth, a lot of what they've done has been a continuation of the work of the previous Labour government. There have been a lot of policies which have continued previous Labour policies, and some of what that Labour government did were in some respects, a continuation of the major government's policies as well. So although there is a great deal of sound and fury and a lot of chopping and changing around the details of some aspects of policy, there has also been quite a significant degree of continuity. I suppose I've highlighted the 4 key areas where I think there is a big job to do in terms of education policy. And so I hope that a new government will really focus on those things, attendance, children's services, the labour force, and the north-south divide, along with investment in buildings. If those 5 things get done by the next government, whether there's a change of government or not, in truth, then I think we'll see the system move forward. So those would be my policy priorities. Whether we'll see other big changes of direction, I honestly think we don't know.
Rachel?
So I, like John, have worked, because I've been a teacher and educationalist and our Children's Commissioner for so many years, for 32, 33 years, you see quite a lot of political change. In my current role, I'm absolutely independent of any political group, and that's really, really important. So my observations, I guess, were, especially having worked through those, the start of the Blair Academy movement, where we were passionate about taking the schools that were failing and there was entrenched failure and really turning those around, and a big focus on that, to an increased focus on spreading that with the Conservative government in 2010 and some quite rapid movement in terms of education reform, and yet, as I said, a failure to do the same with children's social care or invest in children's social care, leading to that stalling, I think, around 2017, where we started to see some of those, rapid changes that had kind of been growing from Major through Blair through the coalition government starting to stall. I think I would be more critical with a post-pandemic response. I think we had the Kevin Collins plan. I was on his board. Whether you wanted all of Kevin Collins's plan about what to do for catch-up, we needed something cohesive, something big. I think 2 years later we're seeing that what was done wasn't wasn't necessarily the right thing. So I hope whoever comes into government, and it does look like change, but whoever comes into government grasps that and grasps the need to develop children's social care, but also to really understand what needs to happen now for children to make a difference for them. The Labour government are making some of the right the potential Labour government making some of the right noises about still standards, but the need for dealing with those wider things. Let's see. But I think the job is clear. We need to put children at the centre of the still needed recovery from the pandemic and the changes that, if we're going to enable change, children need to be at the centre of political thinking, and I think that's what I'd be calling for.
Thank you. Bishop Hall.
So I hope, if it is a change of government, that having an education secretary who's an MP in Sunderland will help a bit more focus on the north-south divide, because it looks like Bridget will be if it happens. I don't think there will be huge changes, simply because there's a very clear concern about the economy from whether it's the existing government or the Labour Party. So I hope there is a recognition that there needs to be a big capital spend on a lot of the stock, but I don't think we'll see massive shift. Actually, the real big shift for me is what Rachel just said. It's not actually an education-focused shift. It's a child and family-focused shift to all of policy. And we need a reformed family test which runs the whole way through government. I would have a children's minister in the cabinet, and the Treasury must put children and families at the heart of its thinking, rather than it's the department at the moment that probably takes least interest in the impact of its policies on children and families.
Thank you. We've got time for just one question, so maybe a brief word from each of you. And I'm going to fold in a number of issues that have been coming up over and over this...
Brief, but lots of issues.
Brief, but lots of issues. Impossible questions. And this really concerns aspirations and morale of students and how we raise that, given that students feel under enormous stress in the current education system. And I'm going to simply read out what I think is a very poignant question from one member of the audience. Speaking about the values of education is very noble, but how are these upheld? My school had noble values, but in reality it felt like we were in a grade factory. How do we raise the morale of students when they feel that, certainly my university students do, feel that so much is at stake, that education stops being a joy and becomes a source of real anxiety? Rachel?
So the first answer I'd like to give you is the answer the students gave me themselves, which is they listen to us. We need to be listened to, our voices need to be heard, and I think that's really, really important. The students also talk to me, and this is ubiquitous around when I go around the country, about it's not that they don't want to work hard, it's that the stakes are so high, particularly at 18, and it's that need for support and that fear that they won't achieve that pass rate to get on to what they want. And the students today gave me a huge number of possible solutions for the next Prime Minister in terms of what we could do about that, including better ways to get university places, but also better management, better support for them in terms of exam stress, and also quite a few of them wanted coursework back actually, which I thought was very interesting. There you go. Some wanted exams. I think we do need to listen to the anxieties and concerns that kids are absorbing all the time from social media, from the media. They hear what we're saying and they absorb it and take it on, and it causes them immense concern. So I think we need we need to rocket boost our support for children. We need to be giving them a positive narrative, and we need to be supporting them, each of them, to get to the next step. Teachers can do that, but the media has a big responsibility too, and we need to be incredibly careful about what we're doing with social media. I'm very keen I'm very happy the online safety bill has gone through. I fought very hard for it. I think that is a major player in children's concern and upset, because that absorbing of things comes from there. So I think there's a lot that we need to do, and we need to prioritise them. But number one, listen to them, because they absolutely will tell you what the concerns are and how to fix them.
Thank you. John.
So I want to just briefly come back to school leadership, because I think that the best school leaders, and particularly the best heads, create environments which are schools, which are places of love and belonging, if I can put it like that, where students do feel that they are valued and wanted and cared about, and where, although people are working very hard, they're doing so confidently and without a sense of undue stress or pressure. And I think that's a thing that the best school leaders are very, very good at doing and creating this culture. So that's why I think leadership and school leadership and the development of school leaders is the fundamental lever for improving the education system. That's point number one. Point number two I think it's Churchill who said, failure is not fatal, success is not final, what counts is the will to go on. And so my message to anyone who's feeling under stress at the moment, whether they're a young person or not, is that in my experience, that's right. Because you'll always fail at some things, and you'll probably succeed at some things, but that's never the final word, and what counts is the ability to persist and carry on and be determined and keep doing your best. Because however dreadful something appears on any one particular day, in a few years' time, the world will have moved on, it will have become part of who you are, you will have learned a lot from it, and you will have grown and developed as a result of whatever's happened at school, success or failure. And so trying to keep perspective, trying to have schools which keep perspective, which enable children to really work hard and do as well as they possibly can, where children feel celebrated and valued for who they are, though, not just for what they can do, is fundamental to having a good education system.
Bishop.
All of that. I think I want to, just because I haven't had a chance to return to one of the things I said, the 25% who it seems to be the system is failing at the moment, or largely failing, tend to be those who are never going to get high grades with the system that we have. And a lot of that is around skills and manual creativity and so forth. And I think we need to recapture listening to what children enjoy doing and what they value. That then actually, if you work with that, they will then realise why it's important to be able to read and why it's important to have some numeracy. I think often the focus on those two is a lot of young people don't say, I don't see the purpose of that. I think the conversation in the group I was with Stockton pupils about, what's a payslip? How does, the credit card, all that. So then you begin to understand why maths matters. And it's listening to children, having fantastic leaders who create the atmosphere that says, we want the very best for you, and how do we work with you for you to be the very best person that you can possibly be, fulfilling your hopes and your dreams as much as we can.
Thank you. Alas, we are out of time. There are so many wonderful questions we haven't had a chance to pose to our speakers, but thank you so much for joining us here at Durham Cathedral. There has been education on this site for well over 1,000 years. When this was a Benedictine priory, it was also a school. Buried behind you in the Galilee Chapel at the west end of the cathedral is the 8th century saint, St. Bede the Venerable. He's often regarded as the first historian of our country, but he was also a mathematician and an astronomer and a scholar of the classical world. He was a man of great learning. Imagine what learning was required to build this great building. The engineering, the understanding of geology, the understanding of proportion, mathematics, and yet it's all lifted by a human imagination for God. The end of all learning, truth itself. So I hope you found this building an inspirational setting to think about the future of our young people and the future of their education with our experts who've given so generously of their time. Would you please join me in thanking Sir John Coles, Dame Rachel de Souza and Bishop Butler.